You can never really know what impact a film will have until long after the change it heralds in is irreversible. I mean, everyone thought that Alice in Wonderland was a lifeless, damp squib from a coasting Tim Burton. Yet it's helped kickstart a subgenre of dark revisionist fairy tales. And when X-Men first arrived on the scene, no one could have expected superheroes to become the dominant force in blockbuster cinema. It's so unpredictable that the films that everyone trumpets as the revolutionaries can often end up having very little impact at all. Avatar may have been heralded as a game changer on release, but 3D failed, and it just now stands as another stepping stone in the long journey towards photorealistic CGI. And even if a film does end up changing things, it doesn't always get the praise it deserves. Some movies are well known for being influential, but often some of their biggest contributions are overlooked in favour of their other achievements. So I'm Ellie with Whatculture here with 10 movies that had a bigger impact than you realise. Number 10. More Best Picture nominees. The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight was the point where Christopher Nolan's ascension to blockbuster king was completed, making over $1 billion without the aid of a 3D ticket surcharge. The film not only became an adored insta-classic, but shaped how Hollywood approached blockbusters. Although he'd given us a gritty take on the formerly camp character previously in Batman Begins, this was the point where the realism really took over. Less a superhero film, The Dark Knight was a crime movie that just so happened to star a costumed vigilante. And yet, when it came to awards season, it was criminally overlooked. Pipped to a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars by the likes of The Reader and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, it brought out the age-old discussion about the stuffiness of the Academy. The direct response was to increase the number of nominees from 5 to 10, which was later reduced to a number between 5 and 10, so a wider range of movies could be in the running for winning the big prize. It hasn't really affected which movies get a chance of winning, but it has led to a number of movies that would have previously been overlooked receiving a nod. And in recompense to the previous snub, Nolan's Inception received a nomination. Number 9. Fully CGI characters, Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. It's not possible to discuss The Phantom Menace without addressing the massive wall of hate in the years following its release. It may have received critical praise initially, but long-standing fans, disgruntled that the film wasn't aimed directly at 30-somethings, slowly tore it down and turned mild disappointment into massive hate. And that's really what its biggest impact was. There may have been slight cases before, Batman and Robin's failure was aided by fan complaints, but Episode 1 marked a point where the internet commentators had the ability to totally ruin a movie's reputation. But all this talk about the reaction to the film often distracts from the movie itself, and as a standalone piece, it's a serviceable effort head and shoulders above the other galactic fantasies of the late 90s. And that's saying nothing of the special effects. Although Steven Spielberg bringing dinosaurs back to life stands as a milestone, Lucas's film really pushed what special effects could do. The much-maligned Jar Jar Binks was the first fully CGI major character in a film, and made breakthroughs with his interactions with the human cast. If there was no Jar Jar Binks, then there would have also been no Gollum or Na'vi. Number 8. Celebrity voices, Aladdin. Aladdin was the third film in Disney's incredible early 90s renaissance and successfully offered something a little more multi-gendered than the solely princess focus of The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. But as well as boasting a human male protagonist for the first time since Black Cauldron, Aladdin struck a decidedly different tone, with Genie's humour resting heavy on contextual jokes that really hit home for parents. This pop culture referencing was a tact that dominated the first decade of DreamWorks' existence and still finds it home in other animations. Robin Williams didn't just shake up the humour of animated movies, but also how they sounded. There have been famous names occasionally behind animated mouths before, but it was never really a necessity until Aladdin. Kurt Russell as Copper in The Fox and the Hound wasn't trumpeted from the rooftops, but a decade later, Williams' turn as the genie turned voice artistry into a celebrity pastime, and now it's impossible to release an animated movie without an A-list star filling out the main cast. Number 7. CGI in a period movie, Titanic. Titanic was an absolute behemoth that showed the box office didn't need to be ruled by sci-fi. James Cameron's 3-hour epic set aboard the doomed ocean liner was old-fashioned filmmaking in a wrapping that would appeal to just about anyone. Everyone was catered for, from teenage girls thanks to heartthrob Leo to those who can't abide romance, courtesy of the final hour, which is one big action sequence. The film became the highest grossing of all time until Cameron's own Avatar knocked it aside and swept the board at the Oscars. Even a minor backlash in the years since can't dent its majesty. But often lost behind all the jokes about Rose not sharing that piece of driftwood, Titanic was, like The Phantom Menace, a pretty groundbreaking film in terms of visual effects. Whole shots were created entirely in computers, and so much of the period imagery was augmented digitally in a fashion that even now looks impressive. But what makes this amazing is that Titanic wasn't a fantasy movie, which was unheard of at the time. CGI had only ever been used for fantasy. The impact of this can really be felt now too. It's rare to see a period drama that doesn't give things a little digital touch-up at some point. Number 6. Music and image intricately linked, King Kong. Although it looks rather unconvincing by modern standards, it's hard not to marvel at the visual effects of the 1933 King Kong. Not since the groundbreaking The Lost World in 1925 had stop-motion creatures appeared in a live-action movie, and here things were pushed to technical extremes. The effects looked great, the T-Rex fight is a standout, and there was actual interaction between the fake ape and the real actors. However, so much focus is put on the visuals of King Kong that many people miss that its real breakthrough was its sound. The studio originally wanted the movie's soundtrack to be compiled from pre-existing recordings, but director-producer Merian C. Cooper overthrew their decision, commissioning Max Steiner to create an original score. And what Steiner delivered was revolutionary. He pushed the new fad of leitmotifs, particular themes for particular characters, and for the first time had music actually react to what was going on screen. When Kong tickles Anne, the music replicates it. It changed the way we hear films forever. Number 5. A New Certificate, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom stands out as the weakest film in the original Indiana Jones trilogy, but that really shouldn't be treated as a bad thing. Taking a different approach to Raiders and the subsequent The Last Crusade, which likely went back to Nazis in the desert after Doom's decreased box office, the film moved the action to India with a more outlandish story and less recognisable mythology. Serving as a prequel, it's refreshing to see a standalone adventure that in no way relies on the other movies. It was equally refreshing to see a film darker in both look and tone, but this led to complaints after it proved too much for some children. Following this, Spielberg lobbied for an intermediary certificate between PG and R to be introduced to put more onus on the parents and allow for movies with a wider appeal. This happened rather quickly, and in 1984, Red Dawn became the first film with a PG-13 rating. A similar situation happened in the UK in the early noughties, where complaints about child-marketed films with a 12 certificate, chief among them the Bond films, led to the introduction of the 12A certificate. Number 4. A Flushing Toilet, Psycho. Psycho opens with an unmarried couple having just got it on during their lunch break and rolls from there. Boasting gruesome murders motivated by sexual repression, it was rather progressive for the time, with Alfred Hitchcock having to fight to get his version of the film released. The first time he submitted the film, the censors bemoaned the now iconic shower scene, claiming it contained gore and nudity. Frame-by-frame analysis proves this to be a lie. Although the violence was a strong talking point, the real point of contention with Psycho was something that seems utterly ridiculous by today's standards. In 1960, the highly restrictive Hays Code was still in effect, with some rather strict rules determining what could be shown and insinuated on screen. And it was the scene where Marion flushes away her rudimentary son just before her death that really got censors on edge. It was not only the first Hitchcock bathroom to show a toilet, but also the first mainstream movie to show the bowl flushing. Scandalous! Number 3. Shooting movies back-to-back, The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings stands as testament to the fact that the word unfilmable really only means just needs to wait for the right director. Tolkien's massive fantasy tome that is as descriptive as it is epic has been optioned for the big screen many times since its initial publication, with Ralph Bakshi coming close to doing it justice, delivering a solid if greatly condensed animated take on the first 2 books of the trilogy. But it was only when Peter Jackson came along that the books got the films they deserved. The defining movies for a generation, The Lord of the Rings reignited the fantasy genre, making the domain of geeks cool. As if they weren't already. The number of films Jackson was going to turn the books into varied a lot through pre-production. For a long time it was only going to be 2, but one constant throughout the process was that they were going to be shot back to back. To do it any other way would have led to a disjointed outcome. A year-long stint in New Zealand saw footage for all 3 films shot at once, allowing for more freedom in the extensive post-production process. The model had previously been tried with the original Superman films with disastrous results, but Jackson perfected the approach, which has since been widely adopted by other studios, but usually for more avaricious reasons. Number 2. B-list heroes, Iron Man. It wasn't really expected, but Iron Man shook up the superhero genre more than the likes of Spider-Man and Batman Begins. Although fundamentally it was a rather standard movie, it brought something new to the table: continuity. In print, these heroes were built around their crossovers and interactions, but due to rights issues, this had never been exploited on screen. That is until Nick Fury popped up in Tony Stark's mansion in Iron Man's post-credit sting, and things were changed forever. Considering Iron Man led to the Avengers and kick-started the whole MCU, it's easy to forget that this feature film film was something of a last resort. Marvel was finally ready to step forward as a movie studio, the bankruptcy issues of the 90s were a distant memory, but they'd sold off all their big hitters and were left with only their lesser-known properties. Before Robert Downey Jr. became Tony Stark, Iron Man was firmly in the superhero B list. Iron Man with Marvel going all in changed all of that, opening up whole new worlds of potential. Number 1. No opening credits, Star Wars. Star Wars is one of the most influential films ever made. It pioneered some groundbreaking special effects and helped cement the blockbuster formula. A couple of years before, Jaws had made history by being released across hundreds of screens at the same time, and Star Wars only pushed that further, showing studios a way to make more money than ever before. One of the most distinct moments from Star Wars is the opening crawl, a throwback to the Flash Gordon serials that originally inspired George Lucas to make the space saga. It provided a major point of contention upon initial release. Traditionally, a film had a full run of opening credits before the action began, but as the serials hadn't done that, Lucas decided to go for the same approach. You see, it wasn't just a convention, but a mandatory rule all films had to adhere to. To ensure his film could get away with it, Lucas had to pay a fine and resign from the Directors Guild of America. Nowadays, the convention's gone the other way. The majority of credits, perhaps excluding main actors and director, are saved until the very end of the film, something that never used to happen. Some films, we're looking at you, Nolan, don't even bother with a title card anymore, all because George Lucas wanted to make a little homage.